Practical guidance for, ah, thank you. Yes, I was going to start the recording later, but thank you for doing it like now because I'm introducing the title. So yeah, so again, this is navigating open science policies, practical guidance for researchers on sharing data and software. We have two speakers from PLOS with us. So Agata Morka and Nonia Pariente, and we agreed to that they would introduce themselves when it's their time. But just a little bit of things to start off with. I just wanted to say this is a welcoming space, and SciLifeLab does have a code of conduct, and so we really want to promote just an open, welcoming space here. And SciLifeLab is hosting with PLOS, particularly the open science team at SciLifeLab, which we're kind of newly launched. We have a lot of things going on. We're going to introduce ourselves more broadly soon. But I just wanted to thank also the team on the call too. So Suné, Joubert, and Alma Nilsson, and Parul Tewatia. Also, it's great to have them here. And then we will be using chat, so ask your questions there. Again, it's a welcoming space, and we'll be monitoring chat and monitoring your questions, and hopefully can speak to some of those on the call. So we will be recording and presenting slides. So that has already been done. So I just wanted to remind you, if you don't want to be recorded, please turn your video off, or and also mute yourself. But we also turned that to default when you came on. So please raise your hand if you want to speak. Let us know too, so we can maybe do something live. And the recording and slides will be shared to our YouTube channel and to Figshare repository soon after. We'll get to that as fast as we can, but we will share that out with everyone who attended as well. So yeah, and I don't think there's anything else to say, exactly that the fact that we're going to have about 10 to 15 minutes each, and then try to leave as much time as we can, 15, 20 minutes to discussion. So I will start here, and just give a little bit of a brief overview about I guess just a little bit of background for open science. And so I'll just share my slides to start here. So I myself, I forgot to introduce myself. So I'm Christopher Erdmann. So I'm the head of open science at SciLifeLab. I mentioned that we're here with the team as well, but we're really kind of newly minted, and we're trying to sort of expand out, to broaden out some of these open science and fair initiatives, really help our community with advancing this. But to start, just a little bit of background. I know, and I should actually share. I just realized share my slides in slideshow mode. Sorry about that. So. So yeah, one thing I always like to start off with, I think has always been helpful to me, is that what is open science? This is kind of an oldie but goodie, but I always go back to this Open Science Now talk by Michael Nielsen, and really the core of that talk was about where we're at right now. In many ways, is open collaboration of sharing, your data and your software. I realize we still have some more steps to take in that direction, but we have like gotten some ways to that vision that he presented in that TED talk. So I always think that's a really great like a place to start of sort of understanding, but it was really about those sort of core topics. And then the other thing I like to share is, so really, what is open science? And I think UNESCO, it it makes sense, right, to go to UNESCO. They're a global venue for talking to all of us about what is open science, what does it mean? And they collected everything and put together this helpful information, particularly a definition, right? And so you can also see other aspects about creating inclusive communities, being openly available. The part I mentioned with the TED Talk, collaborations and sharing, our core. But the other part, and we actually queried our community at SciLifeLab not too long ago about what do you think are the core elements of open science? And oftentimes people forget the society aspect, the public side, which is hugely important, these days. So I think that's just something I want to stress, that we all have that sort of other side that we have to keep in mind and really work towards. And then, this beyond the traditional, right? We're trying to advance maybe some beyond some of the traditional aspects of research. And so one of the examples is we are part of an initiative that's looking at evaluation assessment of research called Quora in like that's a broad community. But there are other examples out there, and I can maybe sort of name some of those others. But this is one of the other things I've been told by researchers is like it's so great to see this map. Although this is advanced also of like some of the other topics that are sort of under that open science umbrella. So you have big data, you have open data, you have notebooks, you have open educational resources. I think the one that's missing in here is hardware. So it has to be updated at some point. But I've been told that this is a great map of just seeing like what encompasses open science, all these different aspects, as you can see. Again, coming back to UNESCO, they asked all of us for resources and they put together this nice resource recommendations and toolkit that are good for anyone who's starting out. And you can see that open hardware is there now. So this is a little bit more current, but yeah, you can see also the other aspects that are covered. And I think what I like about this, it also sort of covers the values and principles of open science that you couldn't necessarily see in the other map. So, those are quality, integrity, and the sustainability aspect. So, I think one of the things we talked about is trying to put things in sort of context and policies and what's happening in the sort of local versus national international and in sort of communities. And the first place I'd like to start is that we in Sweden have a lot of momentum on this front. So we have a national guidelines for open science, and you can see some of the core aspects there. So open access research methods, educational resources, the public engagement piece, and the infrastructure to support. But the other side of this is that I always like to highlight is somehow software is tucked into methods. So that's one area, at least locally, we always try to sort of elevate, right? And say there's more to just the methods piece. And then, in that sort of expanding out, still we also have the Swedish Research Council that sort of has mandated this, or we have this initiative to open data by 2026. So we're really trying to get to that point at the moment. And particularly at SciLifeLab, we're trying to reach that too, of like getting a sense of sharing data and improving there. And we have our own data policy. As well as sort of that first foray into having an open science data policy. And as always, these things are evolving, and we're looking at how we can sort of improve that with guidelines ourselves. And then I mentioned Quora, the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment. We're part of that broader coalition that's also a national endeavor in Sweden, but also internationally. So there are other countries on board with that as well. I always like to, this is work, and so previously I worked with funders, and I have that perspective. And we at the time we reached out, we looked out there and said, is there sort of a clear matrix of like where everyone stands and how we're sharing, what are the policies saying as far as sharing? And I always think this is a great metrics for saying, seeing how that's happening. And some of the places I was previously at Michael J. Fox Foundation and Aligning Science Across Parkinson's, and we saw that there were certain areas that were gaps here between some of the other policies. These are always advancing. This was from 2023, but the one I always like to highlight here is that the preprints required Gates Foundation started asking that not too long ago. But you can see some of the other aspects here that we're missing. And then this is something I actually did with Stockholm University, which prompted us to say, what does it look like for us as far as open access and some of these other things? And it's actually quite good. And when we look at 90% of open access, and I understand that there's a little bit more to sort of unpack there. But a lot of our research is already sort of open. There's more work to be done on that front of getting to a point of some of the things that we can do to be a little bit better on the open front. But that was a great sort of foray into like describing this from a broader sense. And then what's good here is just to say, I think this gets into sort of practical elements of preprints being fundamental here. Especially from the funder perspective, I was able to see that preprints being shared from the community, from researchers, was immensely valuable because that allowed the funding agencies or the funders to see that work and be able to sort of pivot and work with the community and sort of advance science more quickly to advance that collaboration. And because when you're racing for a cure or anything like that, that's very valuable. And it just led to sort of other sort of collaborations, other potential opportunities that I think preprints just really helped with. But the other thing I'd like to highlight is, we're also sort of advancing from the traditional and thinking about things about along the lines about open peer review. And one example there is pre-review, which have examples of working with in the past. But just to really quickly say, choosing a license CC BY is important here. Author addendums, there are other options for sharing your manuscript. One place that really helps us here is Europe PMC. In the life sciences, this is a place where we really like we can really sort of expand access to our research by working with them and giving them access to our preprints. And so also fundamental to all this is a work that we're doing to really stress FAIR, and a core part of that is persistent identifiers. And I highlighted maybe the core ones, which is ORCID and Crossref and DataCite DOIs. These are really fundamental to some of the work we're trying to do right now, of trying to look at how we're sharing and how we can make improvements. But you can see there are other things we're exploring below that as far as other identifiers for grants, organizations, and projects. But the identifiers really allow metadata, associated metadata, and allow us to be more in that sort of machine driven, the machine actionable future. So another thing just to quickly mention here is that on that other side of things, that enables us to see like how we're doing benchmarking about how we're doing as far as sharing our research, how we're doing with open science. And there's a couple of initiatives out there. So the Open Science Monitoring Initiative, which we're a part of. And then, I mentioned PLOS, which we're on the call with, so they'll have a little bit more to talk about that. But they're certainly like leaders that we look to in this space because they're doing a lot of great work of surfacing this. And, some of the sort of monitoring examples that we're looking at for inspiration of how to sort of look at, how we can improve the sharing with our researchers, make it easy for them at the end of the day. And I mentioned again, like it's very important not just to monitor these things, but that it gets back into the ecosystem and discovery side of things. So a lot of times I hear, well, we're just capturing all these things, but the other foot is, well, it needs to be indexed. It needs to be available in these discovery systems. So the other side of it is we definitely want these things to be shared and available in that sense and linked together through these identifiers to improve the research process in general. So I mentioned, where we sort of stand on open access data. Software availability is a little bit more of a place that we need more work on. No surprises there, but a little bit of data about, the fact that we have 50% of these of our research that has data availability, but then you delve into it deeper, and it's like 20% of those availability statements say upon request. This is one of the key examples to bring up that we're trying to sort of move for, trying to improve, right? We're trying to improve the fact that they're sharing their data through these DOIs, through, like their protocols and other research outputs. So what I like to say is avoid parachuting people into your data and software. Don't let them sort of fumble around and try and find these things. This is this availability area is a really great way of sort of giving them that map, that guide to like quickly access these things and be able to understand your research and reproduce it. So here is one of those examples. Not to shame anyone, I didn't include a citation or anything, but this is an available upon request example. And this is what we're trying to do, is provide guidance to researchers on like, here's a template, here's what you should write in this availability statement area, the core information about versioning and identifiers, links, anything else also that helps with them just like not being parachuted in. So let them give them direct information how they can access your data, like that sometimes there isn't necessarily an easy example like a DOI for that, right? And so that's understandable. And the core goal is really to get them to your data, as quickly as possible and share it. So I think one of the good examples out here is eLife. Actually, the person who helped implement this is at Europe PMC now. So I think she's trying on a mission to help improve things there on that front. And this is just an example of like a tool that I always found useful, sort of plugging in a DOI and seeing this power of the DOI being able to provide all that information that you need. And I think the core part that I always sort of like to mention here is that some of the systems don't take into the fact that you do need to include in your sort of citations this bracketed description of software or data, because sometimes that, or often, that actually gets stripped out of references and other things like that. So it's very critical for sort of identifying that on the publisher side of identifying these items so that they can be indexed properly. And just quickly, I'll just say these are some of the other identifiers and outputs that we're interested. So resource identifiers are important to us as far as really capturing that information around antibodies or other related materials. And then protocols, right? These research methods that allow people to sort of follow your research. And so I know I'm short on time, but this is you can always reach out to us, and also remember your library. They're a key resource, and research computing infrastructures like us as well. So thank you, and I will stop sharing, and I will move to next Agata.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for having me here. My name is Agata Morka. I am Regional Director of Publishing Development at PLOS. And I can see that in our chat, there is already a vibrant discussion. So that's absolutely fantastic. I'm sure that we will be able to answer some of your questions there after our presentation. So what I would like to show you today is a little bit of a very high-level overview of what is happening with open science policies in Europe, especially, and then give you some examples of ways of monitoring open science and open science practices, especially looking a little bit deeper into PLOS's open science indicators. So I am very happy to take any questions afterwards. Let me just share my screen and hope for the best that it actually works. Okay, so slideshow. Can you see my slides? Good. All right. So then off we go. So I think that I will start with a fashion statement. I think that you can say that open science is the new black. Open science is really, really everywhere. We talk about it. We try to practice it. Some see it as the way of opening up research and practicing transparency. Some see it still somewhat as an additional burden in their research work. Over the past decade or so, open science has rapidly gained momentum with, I think it's safe to say, thousands of policies, recommendations, guidelines coming from national agencies, funders, institutions, journals. They all do it to foster a sort of paradigm shift towards openness. But what I find quite interesting is when you look a little bit closer at these policies, you can say that we are now dealing with the second generation of open science policies. So some of the first open science policies would talk in very broad terms about a larger vision of sharing research and of sharing perhaps data, but that was already quite advanced 5 or 6 years ago. Now we are looking into policies that don't that they not only mention open access as requirement, but they go a step farther. So we will see that they also encourage researchers to share their data, their methods, and their code. Some of these policies or these newer generation policies also advocate for integrating open science practices into research evaluation criteria. And here are just some of the examples. So on the national levels, we usually deal with plans, strategies, or so-called ambition documents. And the ambitions stated in these documents are, well, ambitious. So they usually say that by a certain point in time, they will reach a certain percentage of all of their research output in open access. Some of the leaders in the European landscape here are the Netherlands and France. And the Netherlands, they now have a new office, Open Science NL, which deals exactly with all things open science for the entire country. And this past year, so 2024, was really incredible year for Open Science NL. They invested over 20 million euros in different aspects of open science, and that could go from strengthening digital competence centers or fostering citizen science and open research infrastructure. The Netherlands, they are definitely in the lead. The French are also out there. They've started quite early in the European landscape with their national plans for open science. We are now, actually the second plan has just finished now because it was still 2024, and we are now awaiting the next move from the French. But we can also see open science policies being introduced on institutional level, and here we are dealing with a lot of diversity. So it can go anywhere from something very general, as a university saying we support openness, to something very, very specific saying all of our researchers are required to publish open access or share their data. You will see great diversity also in language that is employed in these policies. It can go anywhere from gentle recommendation to a very strict mandate. We also have funders policies, of course, and Chris, you showed a really nice slide sort of showing different funders and their policies. Of course, when we talk about funders, usually we talk about mandates. They do require researchers to share their results, publications openly. But here again, and in most cases, they also mention that data should be shared. Those policies are typically mandatory. There is no option to do so, to not publish open access. And you will also see diversity in terms of how open access is defined, whether we are talking only about, okay, it should be published in open access, period, or whether there is a specific license that the publication should be released under. Some of the most advanced funders and most advanced open science policies require the least restrictive license being CC BY, of course. And well, I think that there is a certain challenge that we are facing here. So despite this enthusiastic embrace of open science, the tools and frameworks necessary for knowing whether greater openness is actually being achieved have lagged behind. So what we need is a better evidence on the adoption and the effects of open science to inform the development of support services, policies, incentives, and so on. So we are now facing a crucial question. How can we avoid overly narrow or reductive approaches to monitoring open science? And there are several ways, of course, and several approaches, initiatives that tackle this challenge of monitoring and assessing open science. And I would like to show you some of them. So you will see that the entire nations started to monitor open science. So this is the French open science monitor, or barometer, as they say in French. Then also the institutions followed. Charité, for example, here in Berlin, I'm based in Berlin, has a very thorough dashboard that traces, how many of their articles are published open access, how many of these articles share data, and so on and so on. There are different ways also employed by funders. This is the French Open Science Monitor from the French agency ANR. But there are also some initiatives that publishers put together. And since I am here representing PLOS, I would like to tell you a little bit more about our way of approaching this challenge of measuring open science. So and here at PLOS, we have developed open science indicators. And this project has both short-term goals in mind and long-term goals. I think that probably the most important one and the most high-level one for us was to find a way of measuring open science practices so that this knowledge that we gain can increase adoption of open science practices globally. So that was our long-term goal, but of course, in the short term, we were also looking into improving ability to measure success of solutions and also understand different communities and how they practice or don't practice open science, and perhaps why. As well as we also wanted to support open science initiatives outside PLOS with reliable data. So we wanted to really have a data set that others could also pretty much play with and use in their whichever purposes they would like to use it for, actually. So the next slide. So the open science indicators were based on these 5 principles. We wanted to use established community definitions and standards. So we didn't want to yet create yet another measurement that then would not be compatible with what is out there already. We wanted to measure what was actually happening, not just what we would like to happen. That's a very important one. We wanted open science indicators to be interoperable and scalable. With all the research around them, we took an open science approach. So everything that comes out of this research, all data sets are available and are open. The same goes for methods. And the 5th principle is perhaps the one that I would like to stress the most. So we want open science indicators to be used responsibly. So of course you need context when you look at them. It's not a 101 sort of translation. So you have to really dig a little bit deeper into the data set to understand what's going on. So the data set itself, so what does this consist of? So we have more than 100,000 PLOS research articles. So this is the latest release. So this one covers articles from the beginning of 2018 till the end of September 2024. So that's our core data set, you can say. And then we have comparator articles from PubMed Central also. And I strongly encourage you to consult both the data set after our webinar and read the blog post about our latest release. So those open science indicators can show you, for example, what is going on in terms of sharing data. How many of the articles published in PLOS have data shared? How many of them we have with shared code, and how many of them also had preprints posted? And as you can see from these graphs, it looks quite optimistic because the rate seems to be going up. But again, please use them responsibly and with context. A cool thing about this latest release is that we now can also look a little bit more specific at countries and disciplines. So we can see, for example, what is the rate of preprint posting in different countries. Here you can see USA, China versus India. You can also zoom in, playing with the data set, and you can zoom in on a specific discipline that you're interested in. Here, for example, you have data shared in a repository in environmental science articles. So this is what we are doing here at PLOS. But of course, again, this is just one way of looking at the adoption of open science practices. And we are looking into data sharing, code sharing, and preprints at the moment. There are also two more indicators that are in early stages, and we are looking into developing some more. But of course, the bigger question perhaps is not, okay, we can count, that many articles shared their data and feel great about the fact that apparently researchers are embracing open science. But of course, it is not as simple as that. How do we assess the broader impact of open science? What about, Chris, you mentioned, what about the societal impact, for example, of open science? And there are many other initiatives out there that also try to look at this question with these different lenses on. And I will only very briefly show you these three. And I very much encourage you to look at them afterwards. So there is the PATOS project. This is a European project that looks exactly into many different aspects of the impact of open science. So it can be the societal impact, it can be the economic impact, and so on. And they prepared a very handy handbook called Open Science Impact Indicator Handbook, which explains their methodology, which also, suggests how we can look into possibly understanding what the actual impact of open science is. PLOS, we have here at PLOS, we have our open research team, and they do lots of research on open science practices. They were also, this is also the department who is in charge of our open science indicators. They released a citation advantage study which looks into possible correlations between practicing open science and then your citations number going up. So this is also something that could be of interest for researchers who I believe always welcome the fact that they are highly cited. And the last project that I want to draw your attention to is GRIOS. So this is a global initiative, global research initiative on open science. This is a meta-science initiative that looks, it's a quite ambitious. They started, I think, if I'm not mistaken, last year, and there will be some news coming in the next month about their next steps, because their ambition is to actually prepare a report on the stage of on the current stage of state of knowledge on open science globally. So this is also something that I am personally very much looking forward to seeing how this develops, because that can also gives us perhaps a more nuanced idea of what is going on with open science, with adoption of open science, and how the fact that we seem to embrace open science principles and open science practices more and more, how this translates into actual impact on a society, on the society level, on our research community level, and how it transforms, hopefully, for the best scholarly communications. That's it from me, and over to Nonia.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak to you today. I am Nonia Pariente. I'm editor-in-chief of PLOS Biology, but I have, over my career, also worked at different publishers, at Nature journals, at Embo Press. And so my objective here today is to give you a flavor of the open science policies that you can expect in journals and some tips to navigate them and comply. And of course, these are policies that journals put in place to enact open science principles, and so that the science that they publish is as open as possible and as closed as necessary, as I saw in one of Chris's slides as well. So let me just start by sharing my screen. And then, right, so I think hopefully you're seeing you're seeing now my slide view. So I wanted to start by speaking a little bit about PLOS. So, Agata has spoken about PLOS, but we haven't really said what PLOS is. So in addition to being an advocacy organization for open science, the way that most of PLOS interacts with the communities is by also being a nonprofit publisher. And this is, the portfolio of journals that we have at the moment. All the journals are deeply embedded with open science practices. From their inception, their whole reason d'etre, if you will, is to promote open science and to share open science. And we launch journals in areas where there is a need for openness in that community. Two of the journals, PLOS Biology and PLOS Medicine, have a team of staff editors that work quite symbiotically, if you ask me, with editorial board members that are academic editors. All the other journals work with the scientific decisions being taken by academic editors, but they all have in-house staff that oversee ethical and technological compliance. So all the journals, including the sound science journals, which, don't have conceptual advance as a publication criteria, they do want to publish things that contribute to the body of knowledge, and therefore are very rigorous in ethical and technical vetting, for which there's PLOS staff involved. So I wanted to just, give you a few brief vignettes of the types of policies that you can encounter and what they mean and how to navigate them. And so the first one I'm going to talk about is data sharing. I'm happy to go last because a lot of it I can just go through very in breeze through. I do have to say PLOS established its data sharing policy in 2014. So it was not there from the inception. In the beginning, it was all about open access. But as Chris and Agata have said, things have evolved over time. Since 2014, we require that authors make all data underlying the findings available. This is the summary data underlying the figures in the papers, not necessarily all of the raw data. This depends on the communities of practice. For example, genomic data, structures, proteomics, etc. These are requested to be deposited in community accepted repositories, but But there's other data, for example, microscopy, for which even the communities are grappling on how to exactly share raw data. But at least all of the summary findings, including all the, technical replicates and biological replicates, how you found the errors, the standard deviations, the standard errors that you're reporting, all of this needs to be deposited. And the thing is that, traditionally this has been Excel tables in supplementary information, but as Chris, already alluded to, these things are not findable. They're not machine readable. They don't have DOIs, so they're not easily citable. And so we are moving toward a situation in which we're promoting more and more the use of external repositories, even for these Excel sheets in principle. And so, for example, PLOS Biology, we put these shields that I'm showing here when there is data that is available externally. And in 2024, so we have 95+% of paper sharing data, 70% of them in 2024 shared data in their repository, which we're quite proud about. But I do have to say this requires extensive editorial monitoring and helping authors one-on-one, which not all journals have the capacity to do across the landscape, of course. So the best thing would be for authors to really understand the practices, the reason why this is important, and do it spontaneously, because many journals don't have this careful monitoring in place. The reason we say that we only have 95 to 97% of data there is because there are exceptions to it. And I saw lots of discussion in the chat already about this. The exceptions that PLOS admits are for privacy purposes, although we do, sometimes require that there's the position in access restricted databases, for example. And if the data that you're using is not your own and it's third party and it's proprietary and cannot be shared, then you, of course, don't need to share it. But the fact that you might want to exploit the data commercially is not a reason not to share. So one of the things that also both I think Chris and Agata have alluded to is data management plans, because a lot of funders now require them. From the point of view of a journal, I always recommend people use them. They are very, very useful to keep track of the data that is generated in a project, to understand and decide upfront how you're going to share it, how you're going to handle it, how you're going to release it, and the short and long-term storage of the data. So I highly recommend it. And also, if you're collaborating, is who owns what, where is it going to be? Because when you come down to writing the papers coming out of all this, so often it's like, where's the data, or the data, we lost it. On to code sharing. Here, journals have different degrees of stringency with their policies. It kind of depends also the communities that they cater to. Within the PLOS portfolio, the most stringent policy is that of PLOS computational biology, and it's a policy that I'm proud to announce PLOS biology will, it's de facto already enforcing, but it will become policy this year, which is that all code needs to be shared. And by all code, we mean the scripts you write to link to our programs together. Because the problem is that for reproducibility, if somebody wants to use your approach and you're leaving out scripts that you've used, it's very difficult. So most journals across publishers, when they have a code sharing policy, what they're saying is that code that you have written that underlie main findings of the paper should be shared. But this is now going to a situation where all code you've generated needs to be shared so that others can reproduce your findings and use your methodology, essentially. And so I'm going to breeze through this because Chris alluded to it. But again, two things that are very important for journals are that the code you share has a DOI so that it's citable, and that it's time-stamped. GitHub, for example, is a very used repository, and it's great. It's a live thing. You can improve your code. People can comment on your code. The problem it has for publication is that you can change your code silently, and so it's no longer the code you use to generate that data that you published. And so we need a time-stamped version of it. And so what we now have is that, people can share and should share the GitHub URL, for example, but we're asking, so in 2023, we started asking people very consistently to provide us with a version of the code that's time-stamped and has a DOI. And because Zenodo has an integration with GitHub that's really easy to use, we suggested Zenodo, people could use Zenodo, and you can see there the uptake in Zenodo since we have started actively doing this. I wanted to give, then more briefer vignettes about other aspects of open science that are a work in progress, and there's normally no mandates in journals, but that's the direction of travel. And definitely that's what we need for a community that is open and wants to enable others to follow their footsteps and continue their science. And one of them is publishing protocols. It not only gives you credit because you have another publication, but method sections in papers are not really the place to get a step-by-step instructions on how you're doing things. And if you're doing a PCR, perhaps this is not necessary. But if you really are generating new methodology, we really encourage that you publish your protocols. Many places will publish them and link them to your articles. That's the best way. And be very transparent how you report your methods. Again, most journals don't have the capacity to police all of the methods of reporting, but there are tools that can help you be as transparent and open as possible. One of them is this MDAR checklist. Some journals now require that you provide it with your paper, but even if they don't, it's really good practice to go through the checklist and see whether in your manuscript you have reported all the things that are required. Blinding, randomization, power calculations, etc., but many other things. If you're working with animals, then the ARRIVE guidelines are your go-to place for that kind of information if you follow the checklist and report what is required for transparent reporting. And I just wanted to call out here a tool from the NC3Rs, which is the Experimental Design Assistant, EDA. This you would use before, like when you're planning your experiments, but it guides you step by step to make sure that you are doing the power calculations the right way, that you're taking everything into consideration so that your output is conclusive. And it also gives you a blueprint for reporting, which is transparent. Materials sharing is something that I would say is green. Green meaning immature, not all right in the publishing world. We of course recommend that things are deposited as possible, so plasmids and agene, cells and microbes in their culture collections, etc. But there really is, as far as I'm concerned, very little to no mandate from journals that you do this. What is required is that everything you publish is accessible for others on request. So if for research purposes only, and you can request that a material transfer agreement be signed, but you have to share everything you publish. That is kind of universal requirement. And if you, as a researcher, find yourself in trouble because people are not willing, if you contact the journal or the editor, they will intervene, and papers can be retracted if people are not willing to share materials. Again, there are repositories, and therefore we journals are encouraging people to use them so that people don't have to come to them for the materials, but this is early days there. And two things I wanted to finish on. One is responsible authorship. This is part of open science, and it's in the UNESCO declaration. But not many people think about this still, and this refers to what is also commonly known as helicopter science. So PLOS launched in 2021 a policy that has been adopted by eLife and the American Society for Microbiology, word for word, basically, and I know it's inspired others. And essentially it means that when research is done in a country different to where the authors are, or perhaps in the same country but in a different community to where the authors are, and there are no authors from the from the place the research is conducted, we will ask the authors of the paper to respond to a questionnaire that we will then publish with the paper. And so this is an example of some of the questions in this questionnaire. And this is all about benefit sharing. Have the authors thought about benefit sharing in the community? Have the authors requested the appropriate permissions? Is everyone who should be an author in the author list? Is everyone on the author list, meets the criteria for authorship? And although this is soft, right, because we asked them to reply to this and we will publish the paper regardless of what the answers are at this stage, I have to say it already changes practice, which is nice to see. So sometimes after we ask people to fill out these questionnaires, we get authorship change requests. So people are added to the authorship that should be authors. And also they say, well, actually, we didn't talk to the local community, for benefit sharing, but we will do this next time. And now we can do this X or Y. So it's a first step, going through towards a mandate, but for people to be responsible in how they interact with their places of research. And lastly, another aspect of open science is open review. And so PLOS very much interacts and is participant with a lot of the journal independent review platforms such as Review Commons or Peer Community. And we also offer authors the opportunity to publish the decision letters and the peer review reports with their papers to be, again, as open as possible, as closed as only strictly necessary. And I'll leave it here. Stop
Oh, thanks.
sharing.
Yeah, thanks, Nonia. I just wanted to say, actually, first thing is we'll leave this open a little bit longer. We included a little bit of buffer time just for some additional questions if people, because I realized we only have 9 minutes now. But there were some really big points in the chat, and I'll just bring them up until someone has a question for us in the chat or raises their hand. But just some initial things that I saw was that I think what we're trying to do is that with the journals and with the monitoring is to speak to that credit situations that your work will be seen, will be credited that way. And I actually envision a future where like you cannot avoid this because I think people will filter based on the papers and other things like that, filter things based on the sharing, because you can't understand the research otherwise if people are not sharing to some extent some of the underlying outputs. I realize we have a question, so I'll let if we can let Lonnie ask the question, and then I can get to the rest of the points here. But
yeah, thanks. Can you hear me properly? Yeah, cool.
yeah.
So yeah, thanks for mentioning that. Thanks for hosting this today. It has been pretty cool. So really thank you for organizing and talking about these things. And I agree with what you just said, Christopher, that like sharing materials is eventually essential to understand how the work has been done and what has been really conducted, but also to reusing it. I was wondering if there would be something that I would like to see a little bit more and see more conversations around, and it's linked to what Nonia was just mentioning about, for instance, this helicopter/parachute research. Is also, and I've mentioned something like this in the chat as well. We should at some point also envision that proper ethics approval documents are also uploaded along with the research. I've been part of a team that has been investigating, and I think Nonia may know about this, but a serial case of people not following legal and ethical guidelines worldwide and locally, investigating now more than 700 of the papers from that specific institute, and having been found that in around 95% of cases, the local, global, and global guidelines and the French laws in this particular case had not been respected. The problem is doing this work was excruciating because none of the documents are made available, which then you need to go through legal hoops to get them, right? You need to make an official request to an official entity that takes years to answer. And when they do answer, even with this legal component of like this entity saying that the university should give the ethics approval document, it was difficult to get our hands on this. And it was particularly problematic in this one case because we saw that the institute was using the same ethics approval number more than 200 times in studies that were widely different. So If we want to be able to investigate materials and we want to consider peer review as not just pre-publication peer review, but just peer review, we look and read papers, all of it, then we need to be able to have access to some of these documents as well. And I was wondering where journals like PLOS would stand on this. Has it been something that's been envisioned ever or not at all?
Yes, so one thing I can tell you, it doesn't fully alleviate the concern, but what in response to this and other cases, what PLOS is now doing, has been doing for probably around a year now, maybe slightly longer, is requiring all those documents up front. We don't publish them, but we look at them. So that is already one thing that I am not sure. I mean, I'll take that away with me, Lonnie. I don't know if there are legal considerations for publishers to be able to actually publish those documents, because they probably belong to the ethical body that provides them, etc. But at the very least, I think what could be done is to require, for publishers to actually see these, because PLOS One started doing this, as I said, over a year ago, and there are many, and I say many cases in which papers are rejected outright because they cannot provide these. So this is a real issue, yeah. So I don't know if this is across industry. What I can tell you is that the PLOS ethics team, which is very well respected and sits on COPE and many other cross-publisher initiatives, has fed back all of this. So I'm sure this is now being considered more widely, but I have no insight into what those policies are going to be elsewhere.
I
Thanks for that.
might be able to help here, Nonia. As I used to work for a big publisher in society, and we asked for, I actually, as a sort of steward in those cases, because these are the difficult questions that I would get, is that, from what I find is, yeah, it is exactly that case, that those things are not surfaced, but, in that case, because at least in my case, I was a responsible steward and said, can you share some of this background material so that we can just, verify. And they shared that material behind the scenes often, or like sometimes it was very hard to track down. But disclosing that and making that more widely available, I think we have a long distance to go, because that involves the sort of universities and the systems they use, and sort of having some way to sort of track that and identify it. I think, like Lonnie is exposing a challenge here. Yeah. So
I mean, at the very least, I think the uploading of materials is a way to also safeguard them in time, right? Like I think the whole thing with, like putting on protected repositories versus saying available upon request, as we were discussing a little bit in the chat, is also that you actually guarantee that the materials will be available regardless of what happens to you and your position, and the fact that you may move to another university, country, whatever, that your computer may just fall or be broken or anything like this, right? So yeah, I think it's particularly important to be able to at least upload somewhere, even if not available to all documents, even like ethics approval, because we don't know,
Yeah.
universities get merged sometimes, document gets lost, and when you go back to research that was done 20 years ago, the likelihood that the documentation still exists is low.
this is
Yeah.
another important point, right? Is that from the sort of wider view of supplemental material, that that's something we also sort of recommend, is like, don't the supplemental material is actually, like a mechanism sometimes that journals use to, to make the software or other things available. But for the most part, most publishers, like most of the society should be moving in that direction of saying, don't use the supplements. Like, let's use these repositories. Let's give them identifiers. Let's make them available. You can close these to some extent, but that's sort of a response to another question of being worried about sensitivity or worried about sharing things. Is that I think this is an important point to bring up, is this is great working with the publishers of understanding those special cases of how we can make things available still, but like also speak to the sensitivities, because Nona, you mentioned this, is not always everything can be given a DOI and shared so simply, right? Like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I think this is one of the reasons why, but again, I think PLOS biology and medicine are in a unique position of having a lot of resource. I think this is probably cross PLOS policy, but it's not maybe enforced to that extent. But we do not allow like lab repositories or even universities. It depends which university and what their long-term procedures are, because we've had cases in the past where, we had the URLs were all broken because the person moved or the university department closed, or so it has to be something where long-term storage is guaranteed. There's somebody in the chat who was alluding to the fact that ethics approval has different criteria in different countries, and this is really true. And so what we do is the research has to be approved in the country it's performed. We reserve the right to go to international standards where the country's standards deviate substantially from internationally acceptance. But in principle, people should be held accountable to do the research in the country where it's done. And so that's what we, in first instance, require.
Yeah, we have time. Oh, is that an old hand or a new hand, Nani?
That's a new one.
Oh, okay.
We have discussions forever. So if there's someone else, just give them priority. I'm just raising my hand just so you know there's interest on my side.
Oh yeah, I don't think we've had let's give a little bit more time just to see, but I did want to point to the fact to the importance of interlinking things as well. That's often the thing that's forgotten. Is this is why we're actually mining publications for DOIs and other things, is that it's forgotten, and when you upload to a repository to share, to link, to your paper or to software as well. And there's these related identifiers options there. And I will also say this: choosing a repository scenario comes up so often, you cannot believe it. And I think that the challenge there is that some cases repositories don't understand the workflow and timelines in a publication sense versus their own. And so we have misalignment there sometimes, where suddenly at the end they're being asked to share, and then like the repositories in a lot of cases in communities and in domains are saying, well, it'll take us a month to curate this, or it'll take longer. And that's really honestly why you have a lot of researchers go to the generalist repositories. And I remember having to jerry-rig repository and publisher scenarios together. That's an American term to like say, like leverage whatever you have in these scenarios to interlink things. But that's really what's happening on the post-curation front too, with the monitoring and trying to expose all these interlinking. But we are working on a project called RAID, Research Activity Identifiers. And I think that speaks to Helena's point earlier about funders. There are funders that are more progressive in this sense, and I think we will start seeing more of these cases of saying, how do we make sense of the hairball of all the things that are being shared? And I think we'll have a much richer scenario where it's like, it's not exactly tied to the publication anymore. We'll be able to sort of ask these questions of who's collaborating on this particular software, I think we'll have a much richer scenario. And we are working on trying to get RAID up and going and helping funders with that case too. So, but yeah, so back to your question. I don't know if Agata or Nonia want to respond to that quickly, but before
I can say one thing is that the data normally, sometimes the software changes, but the data is there certainly before the paper's submitted usually, and after revision. So what we say is we encourage deposition of the data after you finish your main experimental revision because of that issue, right? This should not be something that you're doing pre-accept, because unfortunately the repositories that take longer normally are the ones that are better curated and have more metadata, etc. So they're the ones you want. So we're trying to remind people earlier in the process. So when we invite a revision, we publish 90+% of the papers. So at that point, they really should be trying hard to start complying with policy, because to prevent that particular, because it is true that is an issue, but I think it's an issue more on the author side, because they wait very, very much to the end to do that, because most of these places you can embargo the data also. So you can put it there, embargoed until publication, but so ready to go for acceptance.
Sorry, we can get to Lonnie's question now, and I just wanted to say that I think we'll stop maybe at the 10-minute or 15-minute mark. So, but Lonnie, yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, again, I could go on and on. This is a very interesting topic and very interesting conversation so far. I also put this in the chat, and I was wondering if you had thought a little bit about like actually making availability and linking statements in the abstract of papers directly. Two reasons that I think of that for the first one is that some papers are unfortunately paywalled. Uh, and Sneaky Me thinks that's also a good way to go around the paywall, right? You can put the link to your materials, and in the materials put the link to a preprint of the paper, and then people can actually read the paper regardless of its paywall status. The other one being that it's also a lot easier to then go around and scrape that data out of papers, right? Like going around and checking for data availability or any kind of statements about, I don't know, materials or anything like this in the main text of a paper is complicated. If I wanted to do that, it would probably require that I collaborate with a company like Digital Science, Dimensions, and things like this, or with specific publishers and their own metadata, maybe Crossref to an extent. But that would still be very difficult and fairly inaccurate, because it's text mining. It's with PDFs. It's very likely horrible. In the abstract is always included in metadata of papers, and it's very easy to parse text to a degree. So it seems a lot easier, and I've been doing it for my own papers for a while. So I would like to have that perhaps, and I don't know what your stance on this is.
Agata, or I wrote something, but if you want to go, or Nonia, but I did like, yeah, I think again some publishers are doing this. I worked for one that did this. I'm just mindful of not speaking on their behalf, but yeah, like that, I'm mindful of the fact of that. But there are some, but I think it's not exposed in a machine way, right? Like that's challenging, and that should be exposed through like Crossref and DataSite and those
Yeah.
kind of services. I hopefully we are sort of advancing a little bit more on that front. But yeah.
Yeah, I think getting publishers to all do one thing, it is such a mess that it is really, really complicated. But what I think it will partially alleviate this is that we're probably going to arriving in a status quo where they can be in front of the firewall, at least of the paywall, sorry. Yeah. So the same way references are now mostly, and so it would be abstract and accessibility statements and references. They won't be integrated into the abstract. There's a lot of people still married to the article as a story, let's say, and so things that hinder readability, like human readability, people don't like so much to be in the midst. And the abstract is arguably, a very quick and if well written, very good synopsis of what a paper's about. So they don't want it full of identifiers and gibberish. What their wording, not mine, but I think it being in front of the paywall, and if they were all submitted to Crossref, for example, that would alleviate a lot of these concerns already, which is probably more doable. I'm not sure why they're not sent to Crossref. This, should be done. I have no
I
doubt about
agree. I agree. It would be very nice because it's data that seems a little bit essential that when we want to do research assessment, or like research practice assessment, and it's so hard to get that information, computationally speaking.
Yeah, I think it has to do with their timelines and and then other things that they have to do. Oh, Agata, you may speak to this.
Just to add to this, perhaps a more optimistic note. I'm also involved in working groups for the Barcelona Declaration on Open Research Declaration, and we talk a lot about funders' metadata there. And there are definitely talks between funders that this information about data availability should be part of the metadata. And I think that we can expect some kind of movement towards that also on behalf of funders.
Yeah, in fact, I think also on the RAID side, just realizing you should also connect on that for PLOS. But yeah, I think that there's an interesting thing that comes up with this too, is that I guess it maybe speaks to that sort of narrative aspect versus the links and the identifiers and machine aspect. Is that so there's some cases where people say the availability statement. What we really want to do is move beyond that, right? Like we want all these things sort of interlinked, in the availability statement was like a way for us to capture these things easily in the sort of the paper process. But I think still you need that narrative. You need, from my understanding, with all those cases where you had to have those conversations about sensitivity and the narrative, and that sort of comes back again to the narrative aspects in Cora. The wider, like conversations about some of these things are sort of metrics based, and like having identifiers versus the narrative aspects. And so I think that it's still sort of something that's needed, but yeah. I think we hit the point, right? Lonnie, no more questions. I think you said you had lots of questions, but if there are any other last minute ones, we can stay on. But I think we've been losing people, half of the people. So yeah, so thanks everyone, and please reach out to us. We'll be sharing through the webinar, the list, the recording and slides and everything like that. So you'll get our information, but please reach out to us as well. I think you know where to find us, Data Center at SciLifeLab, and we can actually get those to Agata and Nonia too, if you send those to us. But if anyone wants to drop that email in at the last minute here. I don't have it written, but it is Data Center at SciLifeLab. So you can actually Google us too. But all right, thanks. Yeah, thanks, and thanks to our speakers. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's always a village to put these on. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Could I have you for 2 more minutes, Christopher? Perhaps I've sent you an email and